My name's Monk Rowe for the Phileas Jazz Archive. I'm very pleased to have Hal Espinosa with me today. Welcome,
Thanks for having me on.
and congratulations on your career. I should introduce you as a trumpet player and former president of the Professional Musicians Local 47, which was a pretty healthy organization over the years, I would imagine.
Yes, it was. It really was. Had a lot of fun doing that.
We're going to get to that. You kind of tweaked my memory before we started recording about uh, the way things used to be. And
Hmm.
you mentioned the Iceman delivering ice, and I was talking about the milkman. And just yesterday, I was doing some research on something, and I happened to look at the top popular songs of 1950. It makes me wonder, you would have been 15 years old at that time, and I assumed that you had started the trumpet.
Yes, I actually started when I was 11. I went and saw a movie when I was in the seventh grade, and it was Harry James, and he was the feature. He was the guy, that was the vocal point and his band. And I remember Dick Hames, I think, was in it, and then a girl singer. And I went away wanting to play a trumpet because Harry was in front of the band playing. He won the singer away from, I think, Dick Hames, whoever the other boy singer was. And I went home and asked my dad, if I could get a trumpet. So he went to a music store and got me a $40 cornet because it was cheaper. So so I started in the seventh grade and brought it home and occasionally pick it up and practice. And then when I was in the eighth grade, my band director in junior high school at that time was from seventh, eighth, and ninth grade. So in the eighth grade, at the end of the eighth grade, the music director told me if I would take lessons from him over the summer, he'd make me first chair as a ninth grader. So I thought, okay, I can do that. So I mowed lawns and got the $3 for a half-hour lesson. And I'd have to bicycle about 2.5 miles to his place and back. And I was first chair. So the high school, I'm from Riverside, California. Actually a sixth generation Californian. So when I got to be first chair, it's fun because I was kind of a leader, in the section. Not that I was a good player, I was just in the ninth grade. So the high school in Riverside, there's only one high school, that was Riverside Polytechnic High. And they had a great band. And there were three junior high schools that fed into the high school. So they picked all three first chair junior high players to put in the advanced band. So I was next to last chair. And we were supposed to have a concert the next day at an elementary school, big thing for us. And so the first trumpet player, had a solo. And while we were rehearsing the tune, he messed up the trumpet solo right from the beginning. So Mr. Oakes, our band director, slammed down the baton, looked over his glasses at him and said, okay, let's start from letter C, the trumpet solo. He wasn't prepared for that. And then he screwed it up worse. And then a third time, just as bad. So he went to the second player. He wasn't prepared. He missed it. And so he went right down the row of trumpets. When it got to me, I was shaking. And I started playing. He threw down the baton and said, what are you doing even playing the trumpet? You sound like a billy goat. And he embarrassed me so much that if there would have been a hole, I would have crawled into it. But he's the one that motivated me to start practicing because when I went home, I started practicing between 3 to 5 hours, and then pretty soon it was 4 to 6 hours every day after school because I was going to show him I could play the trumpet. So that's where I started.
I love that because there's two spots in that story where I thought it was going somewhere and it didn't. I thought finally got to you and you played it beautifully.
I would have liked to.
Yes. But then the fact that he embarrassed you and instead of quitting, you went the other direction.
Yep.
So going back to this list, if you're thinking about a eventually a career as a trumpet player, I was just interested in this a few songs off this list from 1950, and we have the Tennessee Waltz by Patti Page, Cry of the Wild Goose by Frankie Lane, and the Third Man theme by the fellow who used to play on New Year's Eve. Remember Guy Lombardo?
I
And
remember them all.
I guess my point is the big band era had faded out for the most part. Um, what were your aspirations, and how did you see that playing a trumpet could be a career?
But at that time, I never thought of playing the trumpet as a career. It was just a fun thing to do. And it became more fun as I got better, naturally. And then finally, I got to be on first chair in high school. And I was really into sports, except I'm not tall and I'm not big, heavy wise. And I love baseball, basketball, football, and I was good at it in junior high school. But when I got to high school, all these kids that were my size or a couple of inches taller just grew like a foot taller. So finally, the fact that I was practicing a lot, a couple of guys from the high school band went to Arizona State on scholarships, and they come back and tell me, Harold, you've got to, audition for a scholarship. So I thought, why not? I'll do that. So two of us went over, and I got the scholarship. So at that time, I got free tuition plus $100 for the year. To buy books and things like that. And my dad worked for the railroad, so I got free transportation over to Tempe, Arizona from Riverside at that time. So there's no cost there. So I really didn't plan on playing professionally. I just wanted to go to college. Went to college, but then in the band, they saw me as a hot shot trumpet player from California. I was no hot shot, but I could hold my own fairly well. So then some guys in Phoenix heard about me and had me play professionally with them. I was 17 and Nat King Cole came into town, and there's one restaurant, not restaurant, but a oh well what would I call it? A regular club where there was entertainment. And Nat King Cole came in, worked for him for a week at 17. I thought, wow, I really love this. And then pretty soon, Ted, what's his last name? He always had the top hat.
Fiorito?
No,
Oh, Ted.
worked with him, but
Yeah, I know
Ted,
who you mean.
he goes way back. But I think he fooled around with the clarinet. And it's been so long ago, I don't remember now. But anyway, I worked for him. Then a movie came into town and got to do some sidelining on a movie. And I thought, this is really a great way to make money, and I was making money then as a kid playing in these jobs. And I'd do a few casuals while I was in college. So only then did I start thinking, I wonder if I could ever be good enough to play, professionally. Because in high school, I'd hear Les Brown playing leapfrog, and I'd try to do it, and I go, but crack, crack, and pretty soon I got it down pretty good.
Was the
And
concept of were you aware of the concept of what they called the jazz chair in the big bands at that point?
right, I was.
And
In
how did
fact,
you what did you do to make it possible for you to sit in the jazz chair?
well, like when I first got on Woody's band, he had two jazz players. One was Don Rader, who we became like brothers, really good friends. He did the main jazz chair, and then I sat on the other end, and there wasn't much jazz in it, fortunately. The jazz I had was in a Harman mute in a mic, and that was easy because I thought nobody can hear this. But all the time growing up through the school system, there was always a good little jazz player. And, when it came to playing, he would, the other person would play and not me. And finally, I don't know if you've ever heard of this trumpet player, Louis Volazon. He was with Esquivel for a long time. He was with Paris Prado playing the high notes. He was just far beyond his age when I used to work with him with a little Latin band. And he played like dizzy, he played double C's. This one he was 20, and I was 17. And there were two of us and two trumpet players. And he'd say, you play a solo. And I'd say, no, not after what I'm hearing from you. I'd be terrible. So every opportunity I had, I gave it to somebody else. So I wasn't really into that if there was somebody better than me. If there weren't any good jazz players, then I'd go ahead and play. And I'd do okay, but I never would, if I was going to be a jazz player, I wanted to play like Chet Baker or Don Fagerquist at that time. Those were my idols in jazz. And, I memorized a lot of Chet Baker solos at the time. So I could fool around with that if the chord structure was proper, when I was playing it solo. But there was always somebody in every band that was really a good soloist. So I just kind of shied away and started, doing my thing as a lead player.
I have a quote here from this book about Woody Herman.
I'm sure I'm not in it. I was only on the band about
Well, you get a
maybe
mention. Would you like to hear the mention?
sure.
He said, in the summer of 1960, many guys passed through the band, mentions a lot of names. And um, in the trumpet section, Bert Collins, Ziggy Harrell, Hal Espinosa, and Bill Berry. The turnover was very high, probably because the bread was low.
It was low.
What is low bread back then?
$135 for the section players. Bill Chase was getting 175
This is per week.
per week. And the section when I was there, it was Bill Chase, myself, Jerry Lammy, Don Rader, and John Bennett. And we were the trumpet section. And we all got, I think I finally got $150, but I used to ride with Woody, and because at that time, when we were on the road here in the East Coast, we'd go to motels or mainly hotels in the city and sleep. That was where we ended up all the time. And we could get a hotel room for two guys each, about $4 to $5 a piece for the room. And sometimes it might be $5 or $6. Well, when nobody wanted to travel with Woody. Woody had a 1960 Corvette, and all the guys, they back then they all turned on. We even had a couple of junkies in the band, and so anyway, I rode with Woody because nobody wanted to ride with Woody because then they couldn't turn on. So I was the the clean, little young kid because I was the youngest one in the band. I rode with Woody and he was a sweetheart. And anytime we went over, I think it was 250 miles on a one-nighter, he would fly and he'd give me the keys to the Corvette. And I'd have Don Rader come with me. Here we are. Don's maybe barely 5 feet tall, and I'm maybe 5'7" at best. So we'd pull up to this, the Corvette into like West Virginia gas station, and these guys in coveralls are leaning their chairs against the front of the gas station, just like you'd see in a movie. And pretty soon they got up and they'd walk around the car and the engine would come up so they could check the oil. There's about three guys looking in the engine. And here's two young guys. I was, I think, 25, and Don was, I think, well, Don was just about 3 years, I mean, 3 months younger than me, 6 months. So, we made an impression, but it was a lot of fun. And the fact that nobody wanted to ride with Woody and I did, it was just fun for me.
I can imagine you at the gas station, the guy's going, "What are y'all doing here?" "Well, we play with Woody Herman." You go like, "What's a Woody Herman?"
Yeah, exactly. One funny thing is when we were on the road, Abe Turchin, I think that was his name. He was the booker for Woody, and he was actually siphoning money from Woody, and Woody didn't realize it. But he booked us in a barn, someplace in the South. I'm not sure whether it was in Arkansas, Alabama, someplace, but we were in the hills, and it was a big barn. People came in with coveralls and women with long dresses, wide dresses. Here we are playing jazz, and then we play dance music too for them. There might have been maybe 100 people, 125 people there, but he booked that just for transportation. I think Woody made $500 for that night, maybe 400.
For the whole band.
Yeah, for the whole band for a 4-hour job. But that's when I was still riding in cars though with other guys.
Did you ever get pulled over in that Corvette?
No, Woody drove fast, but we never got pulled over. Although one time going into not New Orleans, but Biloxi, there's a kind of a bridge going over a train track, I think, and there's a signal light. Just as it started going down the other side, then another thing attached to the bridge, another roadway. And as soon as he was passing a slow truck, and as we started going down, he saw a red light. He had to slam on the brakes. The truck came back and bumped the back of his Corvette. Didn't do any damage to our instruments or anything, but that's as close as we got to having to be stopped, by police.
What did you learn about human nature? This is a pretty broad question, but in your travels with various bands, did you learn anything about human nature that stuck with you?
Oh, I not really. At that time I was young and just wanted to see the country. And I was able to do that. I was actually being a professional in something I never thought I could do. And then here I was doing it. So to me, I was just out having a great time playing music that at the time I said, if this is all I did the rest of my life, play this music, that's all I'd ever want to do because the music was so much fun. I never played lead, although the first time I was on Woody's band, I was playing, like I said, the on one of the ends, Don was on the other end. And then Woody broke the band up because they just didn't have any takers for booking the band at that time. So they disbanded the band. Bill Chase and Woody stayed on, and they had a little quintet. And I went with the old Tommy Dorsey band when Warren Covington had it. So I did that for about, God, I don't even remember, maybe 5, 6 months. And then Woody got the band together again. He had tours happening. So I went back. This time I played split lead with Bill Chase. And so that's the closest I got to playing lead with Woody. But Bill was a very good lead player, knew how to lay back and swing. And there would be times when I'd play his part for about four bars, starting to go up the register so he could, you know, not, take the mouthpiece off of its lip so he can start back on from a high G going up. So that was fun for me and fun. I'm sure for him. Then after that, I ended up getting called from this guy, a tenor sax player called, I think his name was Bob McCoy, and he was the contractor for Buddy Morrow's band. And Buddy was looking for a lead player, and they were going to offer me $175 a week if I would take it. And I thought, 175, I'm making 100, and I think it was 150 then. So I took it. And then after I left, that's when Sal Mystico came on the band. And uh, I can't think of the drummer, uh, the brain, as you get older, things start hiding in your head, all the old
That's
memories.
for sure.
But Jimmy Campbell was the drummer the whole time I was on Woody's band until I left. And that's when he left. And then
Jake,
Jake Hanna came in. So that was, and then Phil Wilson came in too. I think Jimmy Gwynn left probably just after I did.
were you surprised years later when Bill Chase had success in the rock world?
I was surprised. When I was offered a job at Basin Street East by Leo Ball, who's a trumpet player in New York, well known and good politician there. He, I played with some rehearsal bands in New York while I was there a few times. And so he liked what I was doing. He asked me if I would work with him at Basin Street East. He was getting the trumpet section. So we had maybe 3 or 4 weeks till it started. So I gave Buddy my notice. And right after I did that, I got a call from a trumpet player that I worked with on Warren Cummington's Tommy Dorsey band, who had been working in Vegas for a year. And he called, he said, I've got a job playing lead at the Tropicana across the street from the Dunes Hotel. And I could get a job immediately for $250 a week. And Basin Street East was with scale in New York at that time was $135 a week. So
What
I
year
didn't.
was this? Can you remind me what year?
It was 1963, January, I think, is when I started in Vegas. And scale in Vegas, I think, was 176. It was actually higher than New York at that time. So $250 a week then was big time money. And they had to import people into Vegas at that time. The union wouldn't allow people to come in and just start working, a steady job. They had to wait 6 months. They could do casuals, but they couldn't land a steady job until after 6 months that they were there. But they got a waiver for this Viva La Girl show that I was doing at the Dunes Hotel. I ended up, that was guaranteed a 1 year of work. I ended up being there 4 years.
Can you, for our people who view this, define casual?
Well, the dance jobs, maybe an award show, uh, the conference, convention, playing music for people like that.
Okay, just not a steady um, week after week type gig.
No,
Yeah.
the just casuals are, that's what we used to call them back then.
Yes. How old were you when you joined the Musicians Union?
Well, Riverside, California had a union then, and they wanted me to play a show uh, at the Orange County Festival in San Bernardino, another larger city than Riverside at the time, at the county fair. But you had to be union, so they paid for my union fees. I don't know what it was, but I was able to play, and that was at 16. So that was fun for me because they brought in some guys from LA that were much older and professional players.
You didn't
So
have to
I felt
audition
like a
to get
big
in.
guy.
You didn't
But
have to audition to get in then.
no,
You know, I had a little story here from Derek Smith, the late pianist who came over from England to New York. And of course, he went to the Musicians Union because he wanted to start working, and they said 6 months, come back in 6 months. So he did. And when he got there, the person said, okay, there's an audition. And this is a quote from him. So I go into this room, there's the piano. And the guy said, what's that instrument over there? So I said, what are you talking about? It's a piano. He says, you're in. Now go upstairs and pay your $100.
Well, that was good audition. I only auditioned twice in my life. One was to get the scholarship at Arizona State. The other is when I got drafted after I graduated from Arizona State. I was drafted in the Army. And after the 6 months, I mean, 6 weeks of basic training, then they'd send you to advanced training. I think that's what they called it. And I asked if I could audition for the band. So they sent me to the band, and there's this little cornet player. He's had a, well, I was 25 then, I think 24 or 20, no, 24, 23 or 24. Anyway, this guy took me in, and he looked like he had to be 55 or 60 years old, some wrinkled faces, sergeant, the whole thing. Just the nicest old guy. He had me play a couple of scales and read a simple little line. He said, okay, you're in. So I spent my 2 years at Fort Ord, right outside of Monterey, California, which is a beautiful area. So I never had to really go overseas. It was just after the Korean War. I had some friends in college that ended up going in the war to Korea. So I was able to bypass that because I was deferred going to college all that time. And as soon as I graduated, I got my greetings.
Um, so you ended up in a different way going to a war with Bob Hope. Is that correct?
Hmm.
I'm interested in that, how that, what that was like going to Vietnam and playing those tours.
Well, I've told people that's the highlight of my career because when I left Vegas, I ended up being in Vegas for 6 years. I played at the Dunes for 4 years. There were two trumpets. One was Charlie Turner, who was an excellent trumpet player. He ended up uh, traveling with Frank Sinatra for a couple of years. And myself, and he had 60% in the lead, I had 40% approximately. It's hard book. That's hardest show I've ever worked in my life. It was music by the pound. And on one show, the first show, we had a minute and 20 seconds rest out of an hour and 15 minute show. So the rest was just a bar here, 5 bars, 6 bars, and on. Just kept playing. That's why I was able to, leave New York and go right into that job because they didn't have anybody that was available that could handle that. Unfortunately, working with Woody and then Buddy Morrow, I was playing lead and I was practicing all the time. When I was taking from Maurice Scrupp, little sax player, but he taught breathing, and he was a little old man then. And Bob McCoy, another trumpet player who I met at, oh, I can't remember the name of the ballroom where the union guys used to hang to get jobs. Rose Room, no Rose Room, Rose something or other. And I saw Bob there and met him, and we needed a couple of trumpet players, so he's one of them, and he just played great. But anyway, where was I going with this?
I was wondering what the various conditions were like when you were playing for the service men and women in Vietnam. They would set up a stage for you and carry your own sound
Oh,
system.
that's right. I just went way to the right, didn't I?
That's okay. We can go right and left.
But when I ended up leaving Vegas after 6 years, I went into LA and started working. I uh, befriended Buddy. God, how can I forget his name? Lead player with Stan Kenton,
Buddy
Buddy
Childers. Buddy
who
Childers.
Childers, Buddy Childers. Yes, God, he's another like brother to me. I didn't know him. I knew of him in high school, looking in the back of Stan Kenton albums. So he was having problems in Vegas because of his attitude. He was burning every bridge he was at. So he was there in Vegas, not being able to work, and I had my tonsils to get out. So I called Buddy to see if he could take my place for a week. He did, and he just really thanked me because I helped him where he was in a down part of his life. Then he moved to LA. He said, when you come into LA, call me. So I did maybe a year later, and he remembered he took me with him to dates because he had burned his bridge the first time around with all his contractor friends. When he came back the second time, he was okay with it and started working. And I got a phone call from Butch Stone. He was the contractor for Les Brown's band. Asked if I had heard about me from different guys. So he said there was a chair open. So I went there. I didn't know which chair. There was a chair open. When I got there, everybody was in their chairs except for the lead chair. I thought, I got to sight read this book. So I got up there, met Les and then the other trumpet players. And fortunately, I was a pretty good reader, and I had iron chops from doing those shows in Vegas, like I did for 6 years. So I got up there, and after we're playing for 15, 20 minutes, and I'm looking down at Les all the time. He's always staring up at me, and I thought, uh-oh, he doesn't like what I'm doing. But I'm thinking I'm not screwing anything up. Must not be phrasing properly or something. So after the first hour, Les called me and said, let's go to the bar. So he bought me a drink. He puffing his cigar and he's saying, I mean his pipe. And he's saying, Hal, I need a first trumpet player because Don Smith, my regular trumpet player, is on staff at NBC. And we're taking a tour through the South. And I'd like you to be my first chair player. And when we come back, it's your job. So I was, ecstatic. I said, you got me, Les, I'm ready. And the first year, I didn't realize, I don't think that he was doing the Bob Hope show. I guess I did know the Bob Hope show and Dean Martin TV show. So as soon as I joined the band, we started doing the Bob Hope show. And then along with that came the Christmas show. So we able, we got all kinds of shots. We'd get probably 6 or 7 shots each, you know, malaria and all kinds of other stuff because we go into jungle areas, then into Alaska where it's freezing in the same 2 week time. So when we would fly to Bangkok, that was our home away from home. Every day we'd fly over to Vietnam, about a 2 hour flight. And I think it was about 2 hours, maybe less. And they wouldn't tell us where we were going until we got on the plane. Then they'd issue us our information where we were going to the first job. And we would land. We were in these, I think it was a 130. I don't recall the names of the planes, but they're the kinds that would small and they on the side of the fuselage they had the netted seats like the parachute jumpers when they sit there and then hook up and then go out the chairs. That's what they flew us in. And so we would land at the camp, put a show on. They'd have the stage already set, no cover in a lot of places. And in Vietnam, it was 105, 110 degrees out because in December, that's their summer. And we had a couple of guys, Butch Stone and Lucietti, a tenor player, both kind of fainted on stage, because of the heat and the sun bearing down on us. And the military always gave us their hats, Squad 47 or whatever the names. I've got a collection of these caps in the garage that I kept all these years. But the troops afterward, when we were through playing and performing, they'd come up to the band and thank us so much for being there, leaving home over Christmas to entertain them. And I thought then, even if I didn't get paid, I'd want to do this, just because of how I felt, doing it.
That's a great story. When we see movies about Vietnam now, usually the soundtrack are tunes from pop radio that were occurring during the Vietnam War, Sly and the Family Stone and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Yet you're saying that these young men were responding to music that had more to do with their parents than it did with them.
Right. Yeah, that was in 60. I started in 1969 until Bob Hope's last trip, which is in 72. We did 69, 70, 71, and 72. And, the big band era, it started to fold, I guess, when Tommy Dorsey died. And I did get a chance to work with uh, Bob Crosby, but he wasn't a big band then, but he's an old guy in an old band. But the bands are still working pretty well. Les Brown was working well. The road bands, you had road bands out there, uh, like Ray Anthony. And, Ray Anthony's still alive. He's 102. And I used to work with him all the time. And I worked with Freddie Martin, another old time band leader, and he worked quite a bit. We did cruises along with Ray Anthony doing cruises. Harry James, he was alive then, still touring. I worked with Harry. I went down to South America with him. And Billy Vaughn, you may have not have heard of him because he's not big in the US. He's big in Japan and South America. I took trips with him to Japan and to South America.
By the
So
way, I thought of the guy who you were trying to mention. I think was it Ted Lewis?
Ted Lewis,
Yeah,
he's the guy that had the hat on. He was the other
pretend to
main
play the
star that I
quarterback.
played when I was 17. It's wow, And then Marie McDonald was another one. She was an actress back in the 50s and 60s.
Were there any train wrecks or memorable things that happened in Vietnam besides the heat? I would imagine the bugs. If you're playing like this.
Well, there weren't a lot of bugs that I remember, but yeah, we did have a couple of events. In fact, the year before I joined in 1968, the band used to stay in Saigon at a hotel there. And at this, like I said, this year before I joined, but when the band was bussed over to the hotel, just prior to getting there, a Vietnamese put a bicycle, placed it in front of the hotel with explosives and blew up the side of the hotel. All the windows were smashed. Then the bus got there with the band, and when they got in, all the windows were mashed. But there were no bugs, to get in the rooms, and it was during the summer, so they didn't have to worry about cold. But they did say if you see any packages, don't open them. Well, Dolores Hope gave everybody a Christmas gift and had packages put in their rooms. So that was a funny thing. But that was before I got there. When I got there, I remember we were in Da Nang performing after when we had land where the Freedom Hill was, where they'd have 25,000 troops sitting up on the hill, and they had a stage facing the hill. They had buses over to it, which is about a mile over to this hill, and then through a little village, Vietnamese village. So there's a Jeep in front of us with one of these machine guns in there, and the guy standing up with a machine gun, and a Jeep behind us with the same machine gun. In the butts that we were in, they had real tight metal nets across the windows so nobody could launch a grenade in. So you're driving down this road, dirt road, and you're looking at the village, and there's dogs running around and Vietnamese people kind of looking up. And we're going through and get a kind of an eerie feeling. But anyway, after we did that show, we got back in the plane. In fact, it's coming back to me is the reason why we kind of left in a hurry was the sun was going down behind the hill. And so we hadn't finished the show, but the general in charge of the, the troops there jumped up on stage and had to interrupt Bob Hope and tell him, Bob, we've got to dismiss troops. Sun's going down. We can't take a chance. And they dismissed all the troops. They got us in our helicopters. They had helicopters to fly us down to the runway. We got in the plane and took off. And as we were taking off, I could hear, well, we could hear bing, bing, bing. And ground fire hit our plane. And then we swerved, came around and landed so they could check the fuselage, make sure no gas lines were hit. And after about 15 minutes, they cleared the airfield and we took off and went back to Bangkok. So that was kind of a scary moment.
I think that that probably put every other gig you played for the rest of your life in some kind of perspective.
It did.
We talk about, especially people with gear. Oh, geez, this gig is on the second floor. I got to carry my keyboards up and all that stuff. And they didn't feed the band. And when I hear that description, I just said, yeah, that's something to remember. I want to talk about music, musicians, and technology for a bit, and it connected to your role in the musicians union. I came across this historical musical fact the other day, and it said 1927, the first talkie, The Jazz Singer, was released, displacing orchestras in movie theaters. The AFM had its first encounter with wholesale unemployment brought about by technology. 22,000 theater jobs for musicians who accompanied silent movies were lost, while only a few hundred jobs for musicians performing on soundtracks were created by the new technology. And this kind of thing has followed music since then. When you became president of the Professional Musicians Local 47, what was the main concern at that time with technology and working musicians?
Well, at that time, it went to, yeah, all these terms I'm kind of losing from my memory, because I've been away from it well, I stepped down from office in 2009. So what's that, 15 years ago? But they had had the New York,
Synthesizers and the
it's not a synthesizer, but it's similar to it where there's a keyboard player down there playing a whole score
oh, the
for like an
virtual
orchestra,
orchestra.
the virtual orchestra.
Yeah.
Thank you. That that's the problem I had when I was president of the local. We had in our contracts with the theaters there a minimum of at least 18 musicians. New York, their minimums usually were like 24 for their largest orchestras. I mean, largest theaters. And our theaters that we had in LA, they were all larger than the largest one, other than where the Rockets performed. That's a big one. But at that time, there were all maybe 1,000 seats, 800 seats, 1,200 maybe. Ours were like 1,800 seats and similar to that, 1,600, I think, at one of them in Beverly Hills. But anyway, that's our, instead of our minimum at 24, we had ours at 18. So that's what I inherited when I became president, was 18. And they were trying to downsize the road musicians. So when it got to LA, they wanted to have some of their musicians be put in the pit and eliminate some of our people, like the drummer would be out, maybe the concertmaster, and that would be it. That the others would have to go on vacation for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, at least 2 weeks, because no show came to LA for less than a couple of weeks anyway. So even the old shows that came in, they were there at least for 2 weeks. And there were times when I got to know the Nederland, Jimmy Nederlander, who owned all, half of Broadway at the time. I got to meet him, and one time they brought in the virtual orchestra and replaced six of our musicians. So we had in our contract no virtual orchestra and 18 minimum. So we filed a grievance against them. We were going to go to arbitration. So we took him to arbitration. They brought over an attorney that was costing, I figured, around $500 an hour. This is in 2002. He flew out. He's from Washington, D.C., flew out, stayed at Peninsula Hotel in Beverly Hills, which started at $400 a night. And so Jimmy called me up after we had one arbitration hearing. Jimmy called me, he says, Hal, why are you suing me? Jimmy was like, had to be 70 at least then. I said, Jimmy, we aren't suing you. I said, your people here in LA broke our agreement that we both signed. They brought in this virtual orchestra to replace six musicians. He said, well, that's how the show operates, it comes in with that. I said, well, then you've got to check the agreement and either call us, let us know, or tell them they can't come in with that virtual orchestra because we've got a minimum of, musicians. So he says, well, this is costing me $50,000 already. I said, for the arbitration, I said, Jimmy, I said, I know it's expensive. I said, your attorney must cost you $500 an hour. He said, 600. So I was close. And then I said, he brought an assistant with him who had to be maybe 300. And they're staying at the Peninsula. I said, it's cost. And so you're paying his first class on air, staying at the most expensive place in LA. And I said, the arbitration, we've only started this. We've got the two guys in New York who invented the virtual orchestra coming out, for the hearing in the arbitration. And then we had Bill Moriarty, who was the president of New York at that time. We flew him out to be a witness about New York's contracts and how they can't be in there and why they shouldn't be in LA. So anyway, Jimmy said, what can we do? He said, I don't want to spend any more money. What can we do to make this go away? So I thought for a minute, I said, Jimmy, there were six musicians that we had to cancel that were replaced on the first show. And then the second show that came in 2 weeks later for 2 weeks replaced six musicians. So I said, if you paid their wages, then maybe we can make this go away. But I said, I'm going to have to talk to the musicians first to see if they're okay with it. So he said, I'll get right back to you. No, then he said, how much do you think this is going to cost? I said, thinking, I said, probably around $30,000. So he said, let me get back to you. So 15 minutes later, I got his hunchman on the phone saying, Hal, and I knew him. He said, Jimmy wants to make a deal. He'll pay the six musicians for both shows. So I said, well, it's not a done deal yet because I've got to have a meeting with the orchestra and see if they're okay with it. So they were, they took the money. But those are the kinds of things I dealt with the theater pit. But prior to that, when I was still playing the trumpet, back when I was a kid, I went to see the Red Skelton show at CBS. And this is back in the early 50s when somebody screwed up on stage. They had to stop and start all over again because they didn't have tape. Musicians, if they screwed up, you heard, the cracked note or squeak or whatever it might have been at that time because they didn't have tape. I don't believe it was until maybe in the 60s where they got the tape because at that time we we were working a whole lot more. Then rehearsal pianists for shows, for dancers, perform, getting ready for a TV show or a movie, they made money. Then pretty soon after the tape, they'd record the musician in the rhythm section and they'd just loop it and play it, at rehearsals and cut musicians out. And they cut us out. So that was the beginning of new technology for us that had to deal with. And then the theater is the main thing. Motion picture was another too, because they started going down smaller orchestras. And like New York would have maybe 10% of all the music that was done on union contracts. We did about 90% of all the musics that were done on union contracts. So we had the majority of them, but they were all usually 100, 110 piece orchestras, maybe some down to 90. Then pretty soon they were 60 piece because the composer could do a synth and add different parts. And so we're fighting all the time for pennies, for musicians.
It seems like I've seen uh, quite a few movies that if you can wait through the credits, it credits the London Symphony Orchestra, as if a lot of that music, those recordings have been done overseas.
Well, they did go overseas with a lot of them because they didn't have to pay reuse payments. And here you do, I still get, money residuals from movies I did back in 1970. I mean, some of them might be 5 cents, 15 cents, a dollar and a half, $25.
You're in good company. I just got one for $1.64, I think, but it
Oh,
was
so
an
then you're,
ASCAP payment. But you
but
feel like putting those checks on the wall just to
yeah,
a little humor.
but those are the movies that were done on a union contract. There were a lot of movies that were under the table. Contractor friend would call guys and got this movie, and you'd do it in pieces, maybe in somebody's garage, to the rhythm section, then strings and brass, and you'd pay you cash. And a lot of that went on. Some would go into a regular studio, and that's when we kind of find out about it and send a union rep over there, see if they could bust it or keep the guys from going in.
So the players would have been in the union for the most part.
Right. I mean, most of your good players were in the union.
Yeah.
Jazz players were in the union. Uh, and then some, like, I shouldn't mention his name, but uh, I will because he's gone now. But John Hurd, great bass player, he was in the union one time and then he quit because the union wasn't doing anything for him. He never got into motion pictures or TV or anything. He was strictly jazz in the bars. So I tried when I was president, I was trying to get agreements with the bar owners to have a low scale for them, like what they were paying at that time about $50 a night for 4 hours to the jazz musicians. So I'd get a 50 plus, $5 for medical, $5 for pension, get it up to 60. And, unfortunately, the guys that were just doing club dates, they never qualified for medical and was so small going to a pension plan that they were losing that money. So they're thinking, why should I even be part of the union? Because that's all I am getting.
Yeah,
So
it's the
stay
same.
out.
It's the same here in Central New York for years. Most of the players are not full-time musicians, so the concept of getting a gig at a local club and then bringing up with the owner, like, okay, here's my union contract. That would just be something like, what are you talking about?
I know it was difficult. And when I was when I was president, I was elected to the International Executive Board, and it's like nine of us at that time, telling everybody in the United States and Canada how they're supposed to work under union contract. And the small locals didn't like the large locals being part of that because we didn't think like they did. And with me as president of the local in LA and Bill Moriarty, the president of New York, and Ed Ward, the president of Chicago, were big unions. They didn't like that because they didn't think we were thinking of them. And yet we were telling them music performance payment, that you get to play your, summer gigs for the Music Performance Trust Fund. That comes from musicians that record in New York, LA, Chicago, and Nashville. A certain amount of that money goes to create the performance fund. So you guys get that money by doing your concerts in the summertime. And so, we aren't here to make you less than what you are. We're here to try to help you. A lot of your players come to the big cities to try to make it. A lot of them do make it, and they're in LA and New York, in the big cities where they can make some money. But I ran against the FM president my last year, couple of last years of my term in LA because he and I were having problems with the recording musicians in LA. He didn't want to help us out. He fought us all the way in negotiations with motion picture and TV. So he was president of the EFM. So somebody ran against him before and lost. So then one time at a conference upstate New York, I flew out to be there and heard him put down the recording musicians. He specifically said the Los Angeles recording musicians, blah, 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 and just like really talked down about him. So I thought, okay, I'm going to run against him. And I did and failed because the little locals didn't want somebody from a big city because, they aren't going to be taking care of the little locals until this last year. Finally, uh, Tino Camp, Giordano, no, I can't remember Tino's last name, but he's was president of the New York local. He's now the AFM president. So they finally have a president from a large local. In fact, it's the largest one in the country.
I was talking to Tom Scott on an interview.
Sax player?
Tom Scott,
Yeah, the sax player because
yes, the sax player, and
okay.
this the subject of double scale and maybe triple scale came up. Was that something that the union had a role in, or
Yes.
was it just economics that?
Now, in a contract, especially in orchestras and motion picture, if you're playing a principal chair, it's always time and a half, no less than time and a half. The contractor would get double scale. And then anybody that a composer or a conductor wanted specifically, and the guy wouldn't go for time and a half, they could pay them whatever they wanted. Double, a lot of guys were getting double time and triple time because they were worth that kind of money to the conductor. So, and there's some musicians in LA, I don't know about New York, I'm just assuming New York's the same, that they won't work unless they get double time. And they're working all the time. It's their reputation and their ability to do the job the first time around. Because when you're doing a movie date, there's 100 people in the stage, in the stage room, and you're recording. Nobody can really make a mistake. If you do, you have to stop, and then they have to roll the tape back. They have to roll, the movie screen that they have playing behind you for the conductor to follow. So, they expect you to sight read fly specs. You can't miss. So guys, when they're that dependable, they want them.
That's a high pressure for sure. And
It
I
is.
can I can just picture the contractor like putting a check by someone who made an error, take them off the list.
Oh, I know. It's that easy. I mean, you have to really be on the ball. And if you aren't, then you're gone. A lot of times, unless you're really close to the contractor. And, there are times, and you can cut this out of the thing if you want, but there were times back in the early days when guys would have these little vials of cocaine and during breaks, take the contractor out and then come back and they'd always make sure that guy was in their next job. And, it's kind of political. I hate to say it, but it isn't just because you're a good player. Sometimes it's like what you have to offer too. That was then. It's like on Woody Herman's band and Maynard's band, there were some junkies, and you didn't have to do that. I mean, the new kids coming up, college graduates, they, as far as I know, they're pretty clean. They don't do anything like that. They may have some drinks afterwards, but I don't hear of anybody shooting up anymore. And now marijuana is like, something where in a lot of states is legal now. But at that time, that was to play jazz, you had to either shoot up or turn on. And that was just the way it was. Of course, I never did that. I was offered, even when I was on Maynard's band, Maynard was taking that, he was experimenting with LSD under a doctor's care. And I was, in the band for only 2 weeks because I took Chet Ferretti's place. He's from Buffalo, I think. Great trumpet player. And he went off with a trombone player that was on the band at the same time. Uh, Son, Sonny, yeah, I'm not sure now, but he had a tour in Europe and he took Chet Ferretti in the rhythm section. So I replaced him on Maynard's band. But early on in the 50s and 60s and earlier, drugs were a bigger deal then.
It's interesting. I think technology, in one respect, has been helpful for that kind of thing because you've experienced those, except for riding in the Corvette, the um, the endless hours the sidemen talk about being on the bus with basically nothing to do, and with the advent of Walkmans and now the phones and everything, people can fill their time with something else that's not a health risk.
Well, even when I was on the bus with Warren Covington and the Tommy Dorsey band, he traveled by bus all the time. We'd play chess. I love playing chess, and I found a few guys that would play. A lot of guys would read. Most of the guys had earphones and listening to jazz or music of some kind. So we had an opportunity to keep ourselves busy. But when we were out on the road, there were times after a job, you get back in the bus either to go to a new place 100 miles down the road or 200. Guys would start drinking, turning on. And one time we got to the hotel and one of the guys was on the floor of the bus and it just out. We had to carry him in the hotel. But I mean, it was, you're, the guys are usually on the young side wanting to make it. And I don't know whether they felt doing that would make them better, and attached to somebody that has a big name. I have no idea, but that wasn't me. That I like to know what I'm always doing. A couple of times, I can count 3 times that I've drank to where I was drunk, and only 3 times. After the first time, I said I'd never do it again. But then when I was in Vegas, I saw this Louis Volazon, I worked with when I was 17, and now he's playing lead with Esquivel at the Stardust Hotel. And then we had tequila over and over again. And I was fine until I got out and the sun was shining in my face, and I had to drive home with one eye open. And that was the second time, and one last time. And that was it. But a lot of my friends, they drank themselves to death.
Hmm.
And it's a shame because a couple of them that I knew were closet drinkers. We'd be out playing golf. Warren Looney, a trumpet player, excellent trumpet player in LA, originally from New Orleans. He and I and this other trumpet player would go out and play golf. And we'd go to the bar and we'd each have a drink and then leave, a glass of beer or bottle of beer. And then we'd leave, go home. And I never thought about him ever being a heavy drinker until he was found in his place in his apartment dead from drinking, just an alcoholic. And I was pretty close to him and didn't even know that. So I know at least two others that died from just drinking too much. So sometimes you have too much time on your hands and you don't want to work, you don't want to do anything else but play your instrument.
Yeah, and you 4 hours a day, and then you got to wait till the next day to do so. That's a lot of
Mhm.
time to fill in. Yeah.
And then the next day, there may not be work. Sometimes you have a great week where you're working a lot, you're bringing in a lot of money. The next week, maybe one or two sessions, and that's it. And, people just don't know what to do with themselves sometimes. Some love playing golf, like Carl Saunders, trumpet player, really a great player. He was a great golfer. We go out and play golf. Alan Kaplan's another trombone player that would used to play golf with Carl, and the three of us would go out and play. And I was the worst of them. You know, I could break 100, but they were playing in the 70s. Close to being a pro.
I see. I wanted to
But
wrap up just with an
okay,
observation that I've been noticing, and that is what used to be our word. I'm speaking of gig, has now become usurped in a number of ways. I remember hearing DJs start talking about, I have a gig tomorrow. And I remember being like, don't say that. You don't have a gig. And now we have the gig economy, which further usurps our own word.
but Mark, I remember when I was still working, the guys would always say, "I've got this gig at so and so," especially the jazz players. "I've got a gig at Dante's or at the Lighthouse." Occasionally it'd be job. Job was more formal. The gig was the guys, they would say that among themselves. So that terminology has been around a long time in the big cities, and the outlying areas may not have picked that up as fast, but it's been around a long time.
Yes. Well, you've had a fruitful career, and I appreciate the stories you offered today and the information about the musicians union, which sometimes is misunderstood. And
It is.
yeah,
Well, when I was a player, what got me involved was the president at that time made a deal with the Pantages Theater, Nederlander Hotel uh, venue. And so I thought, they they aren't helping us. They didn't give us really an increase in wages or make anything any better. So then a friend of mine, Bob Hardaway, tenor sax player, he's the guy that played the tenor jazz solo in the Dean Martin shows. And Everybody Loves Somebody Sometime. During the bridge, he had played that solo. And he's the one that's got me involved in the union. And he said, "You're always complaining when we were doing a Ray Anthony job during the breaks." He'd say, "Bob," he'd say, "Hal, all the time we talk, you're talking about the union, how it's putting you guys down." He says, then do something about it. He said, I've got a spot on the hearing board, or at that time it was a trial board. He said, run with me. So I think it was 3 weekends in a row we were working with Ray Anthony together. And finally, the last time I said, okay, I'll run with you. Well, after doing that, all we were doing, there were six of us spending the union's money just to say Hal Espinosa didn't pay his $5 fine. So they'd look it up and say, oh, that's $5 fine. Then they didn't pay their, whatever they're supposed to for 25 bucks. That was $10 fine. And it takes six of us getting paid to say that. And I thought, I'm not going to do this. This is just taking money away from the guys. So then I was asked to run for the executive board, and I said no. I finally ran for that. And then finally, they wanted me to run for vice president. I was already in my 60s then. So I had always thought that when I hit 50, I'd get a real job because playing was always fun to me. It was never a job. It was just something I loved doing. It was fun. So I figured when I hit 50, I had to start looking for a real job for retirement and everything. Well, I could never find one. And then when I was asked to run for vice president, I thought, oh God, I don't want to. And then Dennis Street, who was president of the Army at that time, and a few others pointed the finger, how do you got to do that? So I went ahead and I thought, it's been a fun thing to do, but I've done it. I've had enough of it. And I thought maybe I can help others, you know, with better contracts, maybe. So I ran and I won. And then I ended up being president for 10 years. And the fun part about that is I was dealing with musicians that I worked with all the time. They would be on the theater committee, they'd be on the motion picture committee or symphony orchestra committee, you know. So I was dealing with them and still seeing all these same guys I used to work for. So it was a natural for me to get in. And I love to actually do some critical thinking at the older age of 65. So anyway, I did that for 10 years. And then finally I had it. I could start feeling like I was thinking a little bit because we had 63 or 64 contracts that had to be negotiated at least every year, every 3 years, or with the LA Opera and the the LA Philharmonic. We got an attorney to set up 5-year agreements, which was nice.
Well, for
So,
a guy who couldn't find a real job, I think you've done well for yourself.
thank you. And I never planned anything other than to get a degree in college. And the only time I used it was when I was in Vegas. When I was working at the Dunes, this People Girls show, our first show was 11 o'clock at night, and then 1 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the morning. It was an hour and 20-minute show and 40 minutes off. And then that was the whole routine. The rest of the day until 11 o'clock at night was mine. So then I decided I'm going to do some teaching, substitute teaching, because I had my degree and I could do something useful during the afternoon. So I get to bed around 5 o'clock in the morning. I get a call at 6 to teach at North High School. And I thought, well, I'll do this a few times just to say I used my degree. I ended up getting called every day for that whole year during the school days. And I went from being a Spanish teacher to an English teacher to a band teacher one time out of that whole year. And then the kid saw me up there and they would start playing around the horns, when I told them to stop. And then when we were playing, somebody was screwing around. They didn't think I knew. They'd stop and say, you want to stand up? You want to play a solo? Then I want to hear it. Stand up and play. Nobody stand up because they didn't know who I was talking to. So I'd say, okay, you get all embarrassed and said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. So anyway, I got to use my degree one time.
Excellent. Well, thanks for your time today, Hal. This has been very interesting. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mark. This was a lot of fun too, for me to reminisce.
Very good.